Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
My name's Nolan. I'm 35, divorced, and a dad to a 9-year-old boy named Mason. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. Smart, curious, and always trying to make people laugh. His birthday was coming up a few weeks ago, and I'd been saving for months to get him something he's wanted for ages, a custom mountain bike, the one with the matte blue frame and silver handlebars. It wasn't cheap, not by a long shot, but I wanted him to have a good memory this year. Last year's birthday didn't go so well. My family promised they'd come, my parents, my sister Leah, my cousin Patrick, but each found an excuse last minute. Car trouble, the weather, something came up. Mason tried to act like it didn't bother him, but that quiet way he said, "It's okay, Dad. Maybe next time," stuck with me. So this year, I decided to do everything properly. I sent invitations early. I called everyone. Mom even told me, "We wouldn't miss it this time, Nolan. Family shows up for family." I believed her. The party was set for Saturday at our backyard. Mason helped me hang blue and silver balloons. He drew a big welcome sign with his crayons and taped it to the fence. He even picked out cupcakes instead of a cake because he said cupcakes make people happy faster. I grilled burgers, set up the picnic table, had music ready, the works. By noon, everything was perfect. Mason kept glancing at the street, waiting for cars to pull up. Every time he heard tires, he'd jump up, saying, "That's Grandma. I bet she brought her cookies." But each time, it was just another neighbor driving by. 1 o'clock, still no one. I texted my mom. No response. Leah left me on read. Patrick's number went straight to voicemail. By 2:30, Mason stopped asking. He quietly picked up a cupcake and started peeling the wrapper. I told him they were probably running late, but he just shrugged. "It's fine, Dad. Can we just ride the new bike for a bit?" So that's what we did. We spent the afternoon in the park, just the two of us. I recorded him wobbling down the path, then gaining balance, his laughter echoing louder than anything else. Still, as proud as I was, I couldn't shake the sting. They'd promised. That night, after Mason went to bed, I checked my phone again. Not a single text. No apology. No sorry we couldn't make it. Just silence. 3 days passed. Tuesday morning, I was getting Mason ready for school when my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Don't forget Uncle Henry's 50th party this Saturday. $2,000 per person. Formal attire only. No excuses this time." I reread it 3 times. 2,000 per person. No excuses. No mention of Mason's birthday. No explanation. Not even a fake apology. Just a demand, like I was a guest, not her son. I didn't respond right away. I dropped Mason off, went home, and sat at the kitchen table staring at that text. The more I thought about it, the more something inside me shifted. They ignored Mason. They ignored me. But they expected me to show up to some overpriced party for an uncle who's never remembered my birthday, let alone my kids. So I did something I'd never done before, something petty, but satisfying. I grabbed an envelope, slipped $2 bills inside, and wrote a short note. "Count us out." No signature, no explanation. Just that. I mailed it the next day. I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe they'd get the message. But the next morning, around 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. I thought it was a delivery, but when I opened the door, there was my dad, red-faced, jaw tight, and standing right beside him was a police officer. Dad's voice came out clipped and angry. "Nolan, we need to talk. Right now." The officer shifted his weight, glancing between us like he didn't want to be there. Mason was upstairs getting dressed. My stomach dropped as I stepped aside, motioning them in. I had no idea what my father could possibly have brought the police here for, but judging by the look on his face, it wasn't going to be good. Dad didn't wait for me to say anything. He stepped into the house like he still owned the place, his shoes dragging dirt onto the mat Mason and I had just cleaned the day before. The police officer followed slowly, looking uncomfortable. "Dad?" I started, trying to keep my tone steady. "What's going on?" He turned around, his expression a strange mix of outrage and disappointment. "You tell me, Nolan. You think this is funny? Sending money in the mail to mock your mother?" For a second, I just blinked at him. That's what this was about. The $2 note. I tried to breathe evenly. You mean the envelope I sent in response to Mom's message? He crossed his arms. You embarrassed her. She said you sent her an envelope like some kind of insult. She was in tears. Tears? I asked quietly. She didn't shed a single one when Mason spent his birthday waiting by the window for her, or when no one from our so-called family showed up. But $2 is what breaks her. The officer cleared his throat lightly, like he wanted to interrupt, but wasn't sure if he should. Mr. Miller, he said, addressing my dad first. We discussed this before coming. This doesn't appear to be a criminal matter. Dad ignored him. You're ungrateful, Nolan. You know that. Your mother has done everything for you. And this, he jabbed a finger toward me. This childish stunt, it's beyond disrespectful. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. I wanted to stay calm, especially with the officer watching, but his words hit a nerve. You call it childish? I call it honest, I said quietly. You all skipped Mason's birthday without a word, and 3 days later, you text me asking for $2,000 per person like nothing happened. You don't see how wrong that is. Dad's jaw tightened. We had other obligations. It's not like it was intentional. Then why didn't anyone say something? You could have called, texted, anything. He looked away for a second before muttering, we didn't think it mattered that much. That sentence hit harder than I expected. I glanced toward the stairs. Mason was sitting halfway down, peeking through the railing. I hadn't realized he'd been listening. His small face looked confused, like he was trying to piece together why his grandfather was angry with me. The officer noticed too. Maybe we should take this outside, he said softly. I nodded. I didn't want Mason hearing any more of it. We stepped onto the porch, the autumn air cool against my skin. Dad started again, pacing a little. Your mother wanted to handle this civilly, but you made her look ridiculous. You sent her $2 like you were mocking her. I wasn't mocking her, I said. I was making a point. You can't demand that kind of money from family members you don't even treat like family. Do you even hear yourself? $2,000 per person? For a birthday party? It's not just a party, he snapped. It's Henry's 50th. It's a big deal. I let out a humorless breath. And Mason's 9th wasn't. He froze, like the question had cornered him. The officer looked down, pretending not to hear. After a few seconds, Dad said, quieter but colder, you've always had a way of making yourself the victim, Nolan. Ever since you were a kid. That was his favorite phrase when I was growing up. You're making yourself the victim. It usually came right before I got blamed for something Leah had done. It used to work on me, too. I'd end up apologizing even when I didn't do anything wrong. But not this time. I'm not the victim, I said calmly. Mason is. You promised him you'd be there. You all did. He waited for hours, and not one of you even called. Dad's lips thinned. Children need to learn that life doesn't revolve around them. I stared at him. He's 9. He doesn't need to learn disappointment from his own grandparents. The officer finally stepped in, probably realizing this conversation was going nowhere. Mr. Miller, he said, addressing my dad again. This doesn't seem like something law enforcement needs to be involved in. Maybe it's best if you two discuss this privately another time. Dad gave him a look that could have cut glass. He disrespected my wife. I wanted him to understand that. I understand plenty, I said quietly. I understand exactly where Mason and I stand in this family. Dad's expression softened for a second, just long enough for me to wonder if maybe, somewhere deep down, he knew he'd gone too far. But it didn't last. Your mother will not be humiliated, he said finally, stepping back toward his car. You either apologize or don't expect to be invited to another family event again. I didn't respond. I watched him get into the car, the police officer trailing behind him, and drive off. The house was silent when I went back inside. Mason was sitting at the kitchen table, his cereal untouched. Were you in trouble? He asked. I knelt beside him. No, buddy. Grandpa and I just had a disagreement. He hesitated, then asked, is it because they didn't come to my birthday? I paused. Sort of. He nodded slowly. I didn't think Grandma would be mad about cupcakes. That made me laugh a little despite everything. It's not the cupcakes, I said. It's something else. But it's not your fault, okay? He smiled faintly and went back to eating. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept replaying the scene on the porch, trying to make sense of how a simple act of standing up for myself, for Mason, turned into a police visit. My father's words echoed in my head. You're making yourself the victim. That night, after Mason was asleep, I checked my phone again. A dozen missed calls from Mom. I didn't answer any of them. Around midnight, she sent a message. You've really embarrassed us this time, Nolan. After everything we've done for you. I can't believe you treat us this way. Your father is still upset. We'll talk at the party, assuming you decide to grow up by then. That last line told me everything I needed to know. There would be no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, just blame. I sat there for a while, staring at that message, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I realized I'd been waiting for years, maybe my whole life, for them to act like a real family. And it had never happened. That's when I decided that if they wanted to see grown-up behavior, I'd show them. Just not the way they expected. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I opened my laptop and started typing something else, something that would make sure they never tried to humiliate me or Mason again. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Then, on Friday night, as I was tucking Mason into bed, I heard a car pull up outside. I looked through the window, headlights off, engine still running. A few seconds later, someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp knocks. When I opened it, Leah was standing there, dressed in a sleek black outfit, her hair perfectly styled like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. She was holding a white envelope in her hand. We need to talk, she said, her voice smooth but cold. Mom and Dad told me what you did. And if you don't fix this before tomorrow, it's going to get worse than you think. I stared at her, trying to understand what that was supposed to mean. Worse how? She gave a small, humorless smile. You'll find out soon enough. And with that, she turned and walked back toward her car, the sound of her heels fading into the night. I stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, before slowly closing the door. Inside was a formal invitation, embossed lettering, gold trim, for Uncle Henry's party. And tucked behind it, a note written in my mother's handwriting. Attendance mandatory. Family unity is not optional. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope would be the start of something much bigger than a missed birthday or an overpriced party. I barely slept that night. Leah's visit had left me uneasy in a way I couldn't shake off. The word mandatory echoed in my head like a warning bell. Who talks like that to their own family? And what did she mean when she said it would get worse? By morning, I was still running on that restless energy, the kind that comes from knowing something's about to happen, but not knowing what. Mason padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Dad," he said, climbing into a chair. "Can we ride my bike later?" "Of course," I said automatically, pouring him some cereal. "We'll go after breakfast." I tried to act normal for him, but my thoughts were miles away. The envelope was still on the counter, the gold-embossed lettering practically glinting at me in the morning light. I hadn't told Mason what was inside, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. Around 9 a.m., my phone started buzzing again. Mom, then Dad, then Leah, one after another. I let them ring. Eventually, Mom left a voicemail, her voice carefully measured, the tone she used when she was furious but trying to sound polite. "Nolan, I hope you've come to your senses. We expect to see you at the event tonight. Uncle Henry has been very generous with his arrangements, and he's even covering some of the catering himself. The least you can do is contribute. It's family, after all. Family." That word had lost its meaning somewhere along the way. I made up my mind by mid-morning. If they wanted to treat everything like a transaction, then I was done pretending we were anything other than business acquaintances who happened to share DNA. I wasn't going to the party, not after the way they treated Mason. But what bothered me wasn't the invitation, it was Leah's warning. "It's going to get worse than you think." I had no idea what she meant until around noon, when there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't family. A man in a pressed suit stood on my porch, holding a clipboard. His expression was professional, detached. "Mr. Nolan Miller?" "Yes." He handed me an envelope. "You've been served." My stomach dropped. "Served? What for?" "I'm just the courier, sir. Everything's in the documents." He tipped his hat slightly and walked off before I could say another word. I stood there for a long moment, the envelope heavy in my hands. Mason came into the hallway holding one of his toy cars. "Who was that?" "Just someone dropping off mail," I said, forcing a smile. "Go back to your game, buddy." When he was out of sight, I tore open the envelope. It was a letter from my parents' attorney, a formal notice accusing me of harassment and emotional distress over the money I'd sent. They were actually claiming that my $2 note was a targeted attempt to humiliate and cause reputational harm. There was even a line saying they'd consider further action if I didn't issue a written apology and pay for the supposed damages to family unity. I sat down on the couch, staring at the letter, half in disbelief, half in something colder. They'd skipped my son's birthday, lied about it, called the police on me for sending $2. And now they were threatening legal action? For the first time in a long while, I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. I put the letter aside and took Mason to the park like I promised. We spent the afternoon riding his bike, laughing, and pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. Watching him pedal down the path, his hair blowing in the wind, I realized I didn't need anyone else. Not my parents, not Leah, not anyone who treated us like we were disposable. But when we got home, there was another surprise waiting. A car I didn't recognize was parked across the street. It was sleek, expensive-looking, and idling quietly. I wouldn't have thought much of it if the driver hadn't been staring straight at our house. When I opened the door, he lowered the window slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of a camera lens. I froze. Was someone photographing us? Before I could react, the car rolled away, disappearing down the street. The next morning, a new text appeared on my phone from an unknown number. Nice day for the park yesterday. Mason looks happy. No name. No context. Just that. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I went outside, checking around the yard, the street, the trees. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Later that day, Leah texted again. Hope you're thinking things through. Mom's really upset. You can still fix this if you show up tonight. I typed back. You sent someone to take photos of me and Mason? No response. Just the 3 dots. Then nothing. By evening, Mason was in his room building a Lego tower. I sat at the kitchen table, the invitation lying in front of me, the gold trim catching the dim light. I didn't want to go anywhere near that party, but a small part of me needed to know what they were planning. If they were watching us, if they were willing to send legal letters, what would they do next? I stared at the invitation until the edges blurred. Then I made a decision. I was going to the party, but not to celebrate. When I told Mason I had to step out for a few hours, he looked up, worried. Is it Grandma and Grandpa again? Just something I need to deal with, I said, kneeling beside him. I'll be back before bedtime, okay? He nodded slowly. Can I stay with Mrs. Lane? Our neighbor. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. By the time I pulled up to the venue, it was already dark. The event was being held at an old country club outside town, the kind of place with marble pillars and manicured lawns that screamed money. Rows of luxury cars lined the parking lot. I parked near the back, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't dressed formally like the invitation demanded, just a plain button-up and slacks. Let them judge me. The moment I stepped inside, I understood why Mom had been so insistent. The place looked like a scene out of a magazine. Chandeliers, white linen tables, waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. And right at the center, surrounded by a crowd, was Uncle Henry, laughing loudly in his tailored suit. I spotted Leah first. She was near the bar, whispering something to Patrick, who looked over at me the moment she did. Her lips curved into a small, smug smile. Then Mom appeared. She was dressed in emerald green, hair styled perfectly, her usual soft tone gone as soon as she saw me. Nolan, she said sharply, taking my arm and pulling me aside. What are you doing here dressed like that? I came to talk, I said evenly. Not to celebrate. She sighed, already exasperated. You're not going to start another scene, are you? Your father has had enough of your theatrics this week. Sending a police officer to my door was his idea of theatrics, not mine. Her expression darkened. You know why that happened. You humiliated us. I stared at her, feeling that old, familiar mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. You humiliated yourselves, Mom. All I did was show you what it feels like to be ignored. Her lips tightened, and she looked around nervously, as though she didn't want anyone to hear. We'll discuss this later. For now, try to behave. This is an important night. She turned to walk away, but I said quietly, "Did you send someone to follow me?" She froze mid-step. "I know about the photos," I said. "The car outside my house. The text." When she turned back around, her face was composed again, but her eyes flickered, a brief, unmistakable flash of guilt. "You're imagining things," she said, too quickly. "No one's following you." "Then who sent that text?" Her jaw clenched. "You're paranoid, Nolan. Maybe if you stopped acting like everyone's against you." "I have proof," I said, cutting her off. "And I know Leo was involved." That name got a reaction. For a second, her expression broke. Then she said quietly, "Whatever you think you know, keep it to yourself. You don't want to make this worse." "Worse?" I asked. "You mean worse than suing your own son over $2?" Her eyes hardened. "You've made your choices. Don't pretend to be the victim when the consequences come." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing alone amid the laughter and music. I'm not proud of how much time I spent on the plan, but I'm proud of how careful I was. Revenge sounds dramatic when you say it out loud. So let me be clear. This wasn't about theatrics for the sake of drama. It was about making a family that treated my son like an afterthought. See, in a quiet and unavoidable way, what their choices looked like from the outside. I wanted them to feel the same small, humiliating squeeze I felt when they failed to show up for Mason, but in a way that forced them to look at themselves in front of people they cared about. The first thing I did was inventory what I actually had. I wasn't working with rumors or hunches. I had receipts. Mom's messages. The one where she said, "We wouldn't miss it this time, Nolan. Family shows up for family." Saved. Her later message demanding $2,000 per person? Saved. Leah's thinly veiled threats? Saved. The embossed invitation with attendance mandatory and gold trim? In my kitchen drawer. The attorney's letter accusing me of harassment and emotional distress for mailing $2? Photographed and printed. The anonymous text that said, "Nice day for the park yesterday. Mason looks happy." I couldn't trace it, but I kept it too. I made copies. I printed things in triplicate. I taped the invitation and the attorney notice back-to-back on cardstock, typed a short header in plain font. A tale of two events. And then made a simple slideshow that alternated proof of their promises with evidence of their absence. The first slide was Mom's "We wouldn't miss it" message. Next slide. A photo of Mason's backyard party, blue balloons, the crooked "Welcome" sign, a lonely stack of cupcakes. Next, the embossed invitation with $2,000 per person. Next, the attorney letter. I kept the images spare, no narration, nothing accusatory, just text, dates, and pictures. I wanted the evidence to do the talking. I also reached out to the few people who actually cared to help. Mrs. Lane, our neighbor, was first. She'd lent Mason a soccer ball when he was 4 and still remembered the day I held 2 jobs to keep us afloat. When I told her what happened, she offered without hesitation. "If you want them to see, Nolan, I'll stand with you," she said. She didn't want anything in return. She just wanted to be on the right side of it. Then there was Sam, the man working the AV at the country club who used to stock shelves with me at the grocery store years ago. I found him via the usual small-town connections. He owed me nothing, but he owed me honesty. I told him, blunt and quiet in his break room, exactly what I wanted: a 10-minute slot, a laptop hookup to the projector, the DJ muted for a short period, and no questions asked. He hesitated, then said, "People like Henry don't want to be embarrassed. He'll complain if he can, but I can make the slideshow run. You'll have to pick your moment." He gave me a price, cheap, and an understanding nod. I thought, for a fleeting moment, about lawyers and lawsuits. Part of me wanted to escalate legally, countersue for emotional damage or harassment. Another part wanted to keep it simple and human, a public mirror. The attorney letter had already given me a strange sort of power. If they were going to weaponize paperwork and threaten legal action over $2, then I could use paperwork, too. The invitation, the messages. Paper is boring until you stitch it into a story. That's what I planned to do. In the days leading up to the party, I rehearsed what I'd say in my head until it felt like muscle memory. Not to shout, not to plead, just to present. I wasn't trying to shame an entire room into hating them. I wanted them to have to listen for a few minutes to the reality of their choices. If their conscience prickled, that was on them. If they shrugged, that would be on them too. On the morning of the event, I printed out small envelopes. Inside each was a photocopy of Mason's welcome sign and a short note I wrote. This was his birthday party. We waited. I arranged for Mrs. Lane and another neighbor to hand them discreetly to arriving guests as they took their seats, people who probably hadn't been told the whole story. It felt petty and civil at once, a quiet protest. By the time I got to the country club, the air had that special electricity that comes before something either goes horribly wrong or beautifully right. People were milling about in tuxes and gowns, chandeliers throwing soft light across plated appetizers. Uncle Henry looked pleased with himself, the exact kind of smile that has been practiced in mirrors and perfected over decades of being the center of attention. I checked in with Sam. He'd set my laptop where I asked and stashed a spare remote nearby. 10 minutes, he reminded me. You get the floor for 10 minutes. After that, I cut to something else. He handed me a whiskey glass of water. No alcohol for me, not because I thought it would be clever, but because I didn't want anything dull my edge. I took a deep breath and walked into the crowd like I belonged. The way I walked mattered. If I looked like a storm approaching, they'd brace. If I looked like a father with a folder, maybe they'd be curious and vulnerable. I chose the latter. Leah saw me and tilted her head in that way people do when they're weighing whether to pounce. Patrick made a small, dismissive sound and returned to his circle. Mom passed within a few feet and didn't make eye contact. Dad sat rigid, like a statue with a bad temper and a temper's smell. The whole table of people who'd claimed they were family clustered together by the head table, and I could see the tightness in their smiles. It was Uncle Henry who rose and lifted his glass first. To 50 years, he boomed, voice full of practiced generosity. To family. To memories. The clinking started like clockwork. I felt the remote in my hand and the printouts in my pocket. My heart did a small, traitorous leap. I thought of Mason in his dinosaur pajamas, of the cupcake liner he'd kept as a trophy. I thought of the text message, "Don't forget Uncle Henry's 50th party, $2,000 per person." Formal attire. I thought of the attorney's letter and of my father standing on my porch with a police officer behind him. As Henry's toast reached its apex, with laughter and pats on the back, Sam leaned over and whispered, "Now, Nolan. Now." I walked to the head of the room, put the laptop on the podium, and connected the cable. For a second, just one single second, I thought about turning it off and walking away. I imagined the relief of never having to look at Aunt Claire at Thanksgiving again, of never having to see my father's disappointed face. But I knew if I walked away, nothing would change. My son would still have the cupcake wrapper, and my family would still have their excuses. I pressed play. The first slide filled the wall behind the band. Mom's message, time-stamped. The room went still, not a gasp, not a murmur, just the clean sound of people realizing someone can read things aloud without embellishment. My hand didn't shake. The second slide came, the photograph of my backyard. Blue and silver balloons sagging slightly in late afternoon wind. Mason's welcome sign taped crookedly. A lone stack of cupcakes. You could have heard a pin drop. From the corner of the room, I could see the flush in Mom's cheeks, the way Leah's mouth went thin. Uncle Henry's smile wavered like a poorly tuned radio. Then the third slide, the embossed invitation with the cold, gold-embossed demand for $2,000 per person. The laughter died. Glasses were set down. Somebody, incomprehensibly, cleared their throat. I was about to move to the fourth slide, the attorney letter, when a voice cut across the room. "Stop." It was deep and unexpected. People turned. My father was standing up, his chair scraping back like a small gunshot. He looked older than he had on my porch, as if the room's opulence showed him where he'd squandered something. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes and walked forward. "Nolan," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, but trying to keep it reasonable. "This is not the night." My hand hovered over the remote. Sam's eyes met mine from the AV table, small and hopeful. The room's noise rose up into a confused hum, like the moment before a summer storm. I had my next move already planned. I had rehearsed it in the car, in the kitchen, in the shower. 10 minutes. No shouting. Evidence, nothing more. I wanted them to answer questions. Not to yell, but to explain. To my face. To the people who listened as they pretended to be better than they were. Dad stepped toward me, hand out as if to take the laptop away. Henry rose now too, a look of affront coloring his features. Don't, Dad said, quietly and dangerously. You don't get to do this here. The room held its breath. My hand tightened around the remote. I'd come too far to stop. I took one more look at the slideshow, at the image of Mason clutching a lonely cupcake. I pressed the button, and the projector switched to the attorney letter, the words sharp and formal across the wall. Harassment, reputational harm, damages. That was my step across the line. Henry's face drained. Leah's hands flew to her mouth. Mom's composure cracked for the first time, not because she was guilty, exactly, but because the world around her had warped in a way she hadn't rehearsed. Somewhere between the attorney's formal tone and the image of my son's taped sign, a conversation began that could not be pulled back into polite small talk. And that's where you'll have to tell me to keep going, because right as the whispers swelled and my father opened his mouth, not to apologize, but to threaten, the lights flickered. The power stuttered once, then went out. The chandelier's crystals tinkled like a soft, surprised rain. A murmur swept the room. Phones came out, screens glowing like little moons. In the flicker, Uncle Henry turned toward the doorway. I stepped back from the podium, remote in hand, as a man in a dark suit pushed through the crowd from the entrance, and behind him, a woman I recognized only as a name whispered at family gatherings, a name that had been absent from my life for years, a name that changed the stakes entirely. He cleared his throat the way someone does before dropping a verdict. "Mr. Miller," he said, and his voice carried in the blackout like a bell. "We need to speak." I took a deep breath, my hand still gripping the remote. The room was half lit by phone screens and the soft glow from emergency exit signs, the kind of light that exposes everything while leaving shadows just out of reach. The man in the dark suit was unfamiliar to me, professional and calm, and behind him was a woman I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Muriel. She hadn't attended any family events for over a decade, and her sudden appearance sent a chill down my spine. "Mr. Miller," the man said again, his tone formal but carrying an edge of authority. "We're here on behalf of your parents. They believe your actions tonight constitute harassment and are considering further legal remedies. They want you to come with us for a discussion." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not leaving. Not tonight. I'm presenting evidence of what your clients, my family, have done. Ignoring my son's birthday, threatening me over $2, sending a police officer to my door, attempting to intimidate us. This stops here, and it stops in front of everyone." Aunt Muriel stepped forward, her eyes cold and calculating. "Nolan, this isn't about Mason. It's about respect. Your mother and father have done everything for you, and yet you embarrass them in front of people who look up to the family. You're crossing a line." I shook my head. "Crossing a line? You've been crossing every line with my son for years. I spent months saving for his birthday, making sure he felt loved and celebrated, and not one of you showed. Not a call, not a text, not a single apology. And now you expect me to bow to your expensive parties and demands? No, that line is yours. You crossed it when you chose greed, appearances, and entitlement over family." The room had gone silent. People who had been laughing moments before were now staring, some whispering, others frozen in disbelief. My parents were standing near the head table, faces pale, mouths slightly open, but saying nothing. Even Uncle Henry, usually the loudest in any room, looked unsure. I turned the remote, advancing the slideshow. The attorney letter flashed across the wall again. I could see the muscles in my father's jaw tighten, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. "You see this?" I said, projecting my voice over the hushed room. "This is the culmination of every petty, entitled act that's been carried out against Mason and me. The $2 note, the threats, the demands, it's all been documented, all recorded. And tonight, everyone sees it." Leah tried to interject. "Nolan, you're making a scene." I cut her off. "I'm showing the truth. You've made your choices. I'm just holding up the mirror." I advanced to the next slide. Mason's backyard, balloons sagging, the crooked sign, a stack of lonely cupcakes. The picture itself seemed to make the air in the room heavy. I could feel the collective shame of anyone still capable of recognizing it. Mom's hands trembled slightly, and she finally spoke, though not to defend herself. Nolan. Her voice was tight, controlled. This is not how adults behave. No, I said quietly but firmly. This is exactly how adults behave when they refuse to pretend anymore. You forced me into it. The projector clicked through the rest of the evidence. The embossed invitation demanding $2,000 per person, the series of threatening texts from Leah, even her last note about making it worse. I let each image linger, giving every guest time to take it in. Every whispered excuse, every family myth about generosity and appearances was shattered in minutes. By the end, the room was silent. Not one person spoke, not even Uncle Henry. You could hear the faint shuffle of shoes and the soft click of high heels against marble. I stepped back from the podium, letting the images settle in. My parents looked stricken. Leah's face was pale, rigid, anger mixing with the first flickers of fear. Aunt Muriel, who had always been untouchable in her detached manner, now seemed uncertain, watching me carefully. I took a deep breath. I will not forgive this. I will not forget it. Mason and I will never be treated as less than because of your greed, your entitlement, or your arrogance. This ends tonight for us. You all will have to live with what you've done, the choices you've made, and I will no longer pretend that everything is fine. I packed up the laptop, leaving the projector screen blank, the images still hanging in the minds of everyone who had seen them. I walked past my stunned family, past the whispers of guests still processing what had unfolded, and I stepped outside. Mason was waiting in the car with Mrs. Lane, and when he saw me, his face lit up. "You did it, Dad," he said softly, climbing in. "You showed them." I nodded, a small, hard smile on my face. "We showed them, buddy. We showed them together." As we drove home, I looked back at the country club from the rearview mirror. Through the windows, I could see the chaos I'd left behind, the confrontation, the whispers, the first signs of panic. My family's carefully curated image was unraveling. My parents, Leah, Uncle Henry, Aunt Muriel, all the people who had treated us as disposable, all the people who had treated my son like an afterthought, were exposed in front of everyone. The aftermath wasn't quiet. Calls and messages flooded my phone, demanding explanations, apologies, and promises. I ignored them all. I didn't respond to one. In the days that followed, the family fractured even further. Uncle Henry's friends whispered about his outburst and his poor management of family affairs. Mom refused to call Mason, Leah avoided all contact, and my father couldn't even look me in the eye at the next family gathering. Aunt Muriel left town abruptly, claiming urgent business. For the first time in my life, Mason and I were free from their judgment, their manipulation, and their entitlement. I didn't forgive them. I never will. They're still the same people, greedy, arrogant, and incapable of treating their own family with anything but self-interest. But I had ensured that Mason would never be a pawn in their games again. We celebrated our own small victories at home, in quiet ways that mattered. Mason rode his bike every day, laughing freely. We had our cupcakes, our balloons, our little backyard memories that were real, honest, and ours. And every time I looked at him, I knew that this, our life, was ours alone, untainted by the venom of a family that chose appearances over love. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like we had won. And in a strange, satisfying way, I knew they would remember that day. The day a $2 envelope became the truth they couldn't escape. They had wanted control. I gave them a mirror instead. And sometimes, that is the most painful revenge of all. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. My name is Dominic, and I've been the black sheep of my family for as long as I can remember. Not in the got into trouble way, more like I never met their expectations. My father, Richard, made it very clear over the years that he valued appearances above everything. If you didn't look successful, act successful, or brag about being successful, you were automatically a disappointment. That's me. Apparently, the family disappointment. For context, I'm 32, a single dad to my 8-year-old son, Theo. His mom left when he was 2, and it's been just the two of us ever since. I work as a mechanic, and while it's not glamorous, it's honest work. Theo and I live comfortably. I make sure he's fed, loved, and cared for, something my own father never quite figured out how to do. My dad, on the other hand, runs a construction company that my brother, Caleb, now co-manages. Caleb is the golden boy, the ideal son. He's married, wealthy, and always bragging about his new car, house renovation, or his daughter's ballet trophies. My dad eats it up. The story starts the weekend my dad decided to host one of his family barbecues. He does them every few months, mostly to show off. You can always tell when something new has arrived at his house. A new patio, a new sound system, a new grill. And sure enough, this one was because he wanted to unveil his new backyard setup. He sent a message in the family group chat 2 weeks before. Family barbecue this Sunday at 4. Everyone's invited. Bring your appetite. No mention of helping with food or drinks. He likes to play the generous host. But he never misses a chance to remind you later how much he spent. Theo was excited, of course. He loves seeing his cousins, even if they sometimes tease him for not having a tablet or not going on fancy trips. I debated skipping it, but I figured, fine. Maybe it'll be good for Theo to get out, even if it means enduring my father's usual lectures about how I should aim higher in life. When we arrived, the backyard looked like a page out of some lifestyle magazine. New furniture, new grill, outdoor speakers. The whole setup screamed money. My dad was already at the grill, wearing his King of the Grill apron, smiling like a politician. "Dominic, you made it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like he was greeting an employee. "Good to see you, son." Theo ran off to play with the other kids, leaving me surrounded by my relatives. Caleb was there, of course, talking loudly about his new truck. My aunt and uncle had taken their usual seats near the buffet table, already making comments about how Richard really knows how to entertain. I found myself standing awkwardly near the food table, just listening, trying to blend in. That's what I usually did at these things: stay quiet, eat, leave early. But this time felt different. My dad seemed especially proud, and there was this air of anticipation, like something was coming. Every time someone new arrived, he'd greet them and say, "Wait until you see what I've got planned." I thought maybe he was announcing a new business deal or some trip, but I couldn't have guessed how petty it was going to get. Dinner went as usual. The same small talk, the same stories about Caleb's daughter, the same half-hearted questions about me that quickly turned into unsolicited advice. Then, after dessert, my dad called everyone to gather around the patio. He stood there with a wide grin and several neatly wrapped boxes on the table beside him. "Now, I wanted to do something special today," he began. "You all mean a lot to me, and I thought it was time to show some appreciation." Everyone started murmuring, and I just stood there with Theo at my side, his eyes big and curious. Dad picked up the first box. "For my amazing son, Caleb, who's been working hard and helping the family business grow, I got you something you'll love." Caleb opened it and laughed. "No way, Dad. The new smartwatch? You shouldn't have." The rest of the family clapped. My dad beamed. Then he picked up another box. "And for my daughter-in-law, Claire, a new tablet. You can use it for work or to keep up with the family photos." She thanked him, overly sweet, as if auditioning for perfect family member of the year. Then it went on. My cousins, my aunt, my uncle. Each one got something. A new phone, headphones, even a smartwatch for my cousin Nathan, who, by the way, is 15 and broke his last one because he didn't like the color. One by one, they all got something. Then my dad looked at me. His smile didn't fade, but it changed. It became polite, rehearsed. "As for you, Dominic," he paused for effect. "I thought about getting you something, but I just didn't think it'd be responsible. You've got a lot on your plate already, and these things are expensive. Maybe when you're more settled." He said it like he was doing me a favor. The air shifted. No one spoke. My aunt gave me this pitying look, and Caleb smirked. Theo looked up at me, confused. "Dad, how come we didn't get anything?" he whispered. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile. "It's fine, buddy," I said quietly. "We're fine." But my dad wasn't done. He actually laughed and said, "You know how your dad is, Theo. He's still learning responsibility. We'll get there, huh?" The words burned. Not because of the insult, I was used to that, but because Theo was right there, hearing it, watching everyone else hold their new gadgets while we stood empty-handed. I stayed calm. I always do. Losing my temper would only feed the narrative that I'm unstable. So I waited, let them finish their little celebration. Theo kept glancing at the gifts, then back at me, and I could see the question forming in his eyes. Why aren't we good enough? That's when I made a decision. I stood up, placed my plate on the table, and said evenly, "Theo, get your jacket. We're leaving." The chatter stopped. My dad looked surprised. "Leaving? The night's just starting, Dominic." I met his eyes. "I think we've seen enough." Theo followed me quietly, still holding the little cup of lemonade he hadn't finished. As we walked away, I could hear my aunt whisper, "He's always so sensitive." When we got home, I thought that was the end of it. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dad. "Don't forget you owe me for the food. $30 should cover your share." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I smirked. I didn't reply to his text that night. I just stared at it, reading it over and over again until it almost became funny. He'd humiliated me in front of everyone, made my son feel small, then actually had the nerve to charge me for it. $30 for food. From my own father. Theo was already asleep by the time I put my phone down. I walked into his room and just stood there for a while, watching him breathe. He had his stuffed fox tucked under one arm, the same one he's had since he was a toddler. I could still see the disappointment from earlier written all over his face, even in sleep. That look, quiet confusion mixed with hurt, stayed with me all night. I sat in the living room for hours, thinking. At first, I felt embarrassed, then angry. But underneath it all, there was something else, resolve. Because that was the moment I realized something. My father wasn't going to stop until he was forced to see what he'd done. He thrived on control, on power. And every time I stayed quiet, I handed that power back to him. That night, I decided I was done being the quiet one. The next morning, my dad sent another message in the family chat. "Great barbecue yesterday. Glad everyone could come. Hope you're all enjoying your new toys." A few relatives replied with emojis and photos of their gifts already being used. Caleb, of course, posted a picture of his smartwatch with a caption about hard work paying off. I didn't respond. Instead, I started taking mental notes. You see, my dad's business, Richard Collins Construction, is everything to him. It's his pride, his identity, the thing he uses to measure his worth. But what most of the family doesn't know is that the company has been slipping. I know because I used to work there. Years ago, when I was 20, he hired me as an assistant foreman. I actually liked the work, but no matter how hard I tried, he treated me like I was incapable of doing anything right. He'd yell at me in front of other workers, accuse me of costing him money, and eventually push me out completely when Caleb graduated and decided to help. That's when things started changing for him. Caleb might be confident, but he's careless with money. And my father's ego doesn't allow him to admit mistakes. They've taken on too many projects, underpaid staff, and made some shady deals to stay afloat. I'd heard rumors from a friend who still works there that several clients were unhappy. At the time, I didn't care. I just wanted to stay away. But after that barbecue, something inside me shifted. I started wondering how much of that perfect empire was really stable. For the next few days, I stayed quiet, polite, calm, collected. When my father sent another reminder about the money, I finally replied, "Sure thing. I'll drop it off in person this week." He responded almost immediately, "Good. Bring Theo too. Your cousins are coming over on Saturday." The nerve. I didn't tell Theo right away. I didn't want to upset him again, so I waited until Friday night. He was sitting on the couch, working on his little model car kit I'd gotten him for his birthday. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, sitting beside him. "Grandpa invited us again tomorrow. You want to go?" He hesitated. Will he be nice this time? That question cut deeper than I expected. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'll make sure you're okay. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to." He nodded slowly. Can I bring my car? Of course. Saturday came, and the air already felt heavy as soon as we pulled into my dad's driveway. Caleb's new truck was parked front and center, as usual. Inside, I could hear laughter, loud music, and that same smug energy that filled the place every time there was a family day. We walked in, and my father greeted me like nothing had happened. "Dominic, you made it. Didn't think I'd see you so soon after last week." "Yeah," I said evenly. "Didn't want to forget the $30. He laughed, like it was some inside joke. "You always were dramatic." I handed him the envelope with the money and turned to check on Theo, who was sitting quietly at the table, trying to stay out of the way. The other kids were showing off their new gadgets again, all crowding around Nathan's tablet while he played some loud game. Theo looked at it for a moment, then went back to his toy car. "Still playing with that old thing?" Nathan teased. "Don't you want something cooler?" Theo didn't answer. He just smiled politely. That's something he's learned from me. How to stay calm when people try to make you feel small. But my father, of course, noticed. "You should get him something nicer, Dominic," he said from across the room. "It's embarrassing for him to be the only one without a real toy." I clenched my jaw. He's happy with what he has. My dad raised his eyebrows. "That's what people say when they can't afford better." Caleb snickered. My aunt pretended not to hear. I felt my pulse climb, but I didn't react. Instead, I smiled. "You know, Dad, you're right. Maybe I should focus on giving him more. You've always been great at teaching priorities." He didn't catch the tone. He grinned, proud, as if I'd finally agreed with him. The rest of the afternoon dragged on painfully. Every conversation was about money, success, or possessions. Caleb went on about his vacation plans. My aunt talked about remodeling her kitchen, and my father kept making little remarks like, "Maybe someday, Dominic, if you plan right." I realized then that this wasn't just about gadgets or money. It was about control. My father thrived on the idea that everyone around him owed him something: respect, gratitude, debt. He kept people small so he could stay big. And that's when it really hit me. He didn't just want to humiliate me. He wanted Theo to grow up seeing me as lesser too. That was the final push I needed. When I left that day, I didn't just walk out angry. I walked out determined. That night, after Theo went to bed, I opened my old laptop. I hadn't used it in months, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. Back when I worked at my father's company, I had access to a shared drive full of old documents, contracts, blueprints, invoices. Before I left, I copied some of them to my personal folder, mostly because I didn't trust Caleb's bookkeeping. I wasn't planning to do anything malicious. I just wanted to understand what kind of mess they'd gotten themselves into. But what I found made my stomach twist. There were discrepancies everywhere. Duplicate invoices, payments to companies that didn't exist, and project budgets that didn't add up. It didn't take long to realize they'd been moving money around to make their books look clean. If the right people saw this, it could mean audits, investigations, serious trouble. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to close it, pretend I hadn't seen anything. The other part, the part that remembered Theo's face when he was told he wasn't responsible enough, stayed still. I backed everything up. Every single file. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. But I knew I wasn't going to let my father's arrogance go unanswered. 2 days later, I got another message from him. "Dominic, your cousin's birthday dinner is this Friday. Don't be late. And try not to bring up last week again. It's time to move on." Move on. Like nothing had happened. Like humiliation was just part of the family tradition. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my phone and made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey," I said when they answered. "It's Dominic. You still working at the county office?" There was a pause, then a cautious, "Yeah, why?" I smiled slightly. "Because I think I might have something you'll want to see." And that was the start. The quiet beginning of something much bigger than a barbecue or a few hurtful words. It was the start of showing my father that he wasn't untouchable. When I made that phone call, I wasn't even sure what outcome I wanted. All I knew was that I couldn't let my father continue walking around as if he hadn't just publicly humiliated his son and grandson for sport. The man had spent years belittling me, convincing everyone that I was incapable of anything meaningful. And the one person he'd never expected to challenge him, his quiet, unsuccessful son was finally about to do just that. The person I'd called was an old friend named Lydia. She and I had gone to trade school together back before my dad forced me into his company. Lydia had gone on to work in the county records department, specifically in the business compliance division. We hadn't spoken in a few years, but I remembered she was good at her job and discreet. "Dominic," she said when we met later that week, "you always did know how to make an entrance. What exactly am I supposed to be looking at here?" We sat in a small cafe near her office. I slid the flash drive across the table, careful not to draw attention. "These are records from my father's company," I said. "Richard Collins Construction. I used to work there a few years ago, and I think something's wrong with their books. I'm not accusing anyone directly, but take a look for yourself." She raised an eyebrow. "You're aware that if I find something, it could lead to an official audit, right? Maybe even charges?" I nodded. "I'm aware." She hesitated for a moment, studying me. "Why now?" That was the hardest question of all. I looked down at my coffee before answering. "Because I'm done letting him humiliate me. He's been using people his entire life, and I'm tired of watching him get away with it." She gave me a long, searching look before pocketing the drive. "I'll take a look, but I can't promise anything." "I don't need promises," I said quietly. "Just the truth." We talked for a few more minutes about how she'd go about it discreetly, then I left. I didn't expect immediate results, but that meeting alone brought a strange kind of peace. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my father. I was taking control. Meanwhile, I played the part of the dutiful son again. I went to my cousin's birthday dinner that Friday, mostly to avoid raising suspicion. Theo didn't want to go, but I convinced him it would just be a quick visit. When we arrived, the house was buzzing with noise and laughter. My aunt had gone all out for the party: decorations, balloons, and a table overflowing with food. My father was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. "Dominic," he said when he saw me, "glad you decided to show up. Didn't think you'd still be upset about the other day." I forced a polite smile. "Not upset, Dad. Just busy. Busy fixing cars." Caleb cut in with a grin. "You must have a lot of them piling up." He thought he was being funny, but all I did was nod. "Yeah, a lot of people trust me with their engines. Hard work pays off." That wiped the smirk off his face. My father gave a half-hearted chuckle, but I could tell he didn't like the tone. He preferred me small and compliant, not quietly confident. As the night went on, I noticed how predictable everything was. My relatives were performing the same roles they always did. My aunt flattering my father, my cousins showing off their new things, and my dad using the opportunity to remind everyone how much he'd done for the family. It was almost rehearsed. Halfway through dinner, my father leaned over the table and said, "You know, Dominic, you could be doing better for yourself if you'd just come back and work with me again. Caleb could use the help, and it would give you a steady income." I looked at him. "You mean go back to being yelled at and underpaid?" The table went quiet. My father frowned. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant," I said softly. "We both know it." He sat back in his chair, clearly irritated. "You always take things so personally. I'm offering you an opportunity." "No, Dad," I replied. "You're offering me control. There's a difference." He didn't like that either. His expression hardened, and I knew the rest of the night was going to be uncomfortable. But at that point, I didn't care. I was done trying to win his approval. When we finally left, I noticed my father watching us from the window as we got into the car. His face was unreadable, but I could sense the shift. He didn't know what I was planning, but he could tell something had changed. Over the next few weeks, I went about life as usual. Work, school runs, dinners with Theo. I didn't bring up my father or the company. I just waited. Lydia hadn't contacted me yet, but I trusted she would when there was something to say. Then, one Thursday evening, I got a text. "Can you come by tomorrow? Found something you should see." I barely slept that night. The next day, I met Lydia again at her office. She closed the blinds before plugging the flash drive into her computer. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You weren't wrong," she said. "Your father's company has been submitting inflated project budgets for at least 3 years. There are multiple fake subcontractors listed, companies that don't exist. It looks like someone's been creating fake invoices to move money around." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. How bad is it? Bad enough that if the county decides to audit, they could lose their business license. There's also a chance of criminal charges if they can't justify those payments. I sat back in my chair. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd wanted to expose my father's arrogance, but this was bigger than I'd imagined. Can you tell who did it? I asked finally. She hesitated. It's hard to say for sure, but most of the documents were signed off by Caleb. That didn't surprise me. My father had always trusted Caleb more than anyone. He probably handed over control without checking the details. Lydia gave me a cautious look. Dominic, if I submit this, things are going to move fast. Are you ready for that? I thought about Theo, about the look on his face at that barbecue, the way he'd asked if Grandpa would be nice next time. Then I thought about all the years of being belittled, dismissed, and used. Yes, I said. I'm ready. She nodded and slid a folder toward me. Then sign here. This just confirms that you provided the materials voluntarily. I signed it. My hands didn't even shake. Over the next week, things started happening behind the scenes. I didn't tell anyone, not even Theo, but I could feel it building. There were whispers in the local contractor community, rumors that the county was reviewing bids and looking into irregularities. My father's company name started coming up more and more. Then one evening, about 10 days later, my father called me. Dominic, he said, his voice clipped. You wouldn't happen to know why the county just froze one of our accounts, would you? I kept my tone neutral. No idea. What? They're saying there's some kind of investigation. Someone reported irregularities. It's nonsense, but it's causing problems. I leaned against the counter, pretending to think. Weird. Maybe you should check your books. You've always said you run a clean business, right? He paused. Don't play games with me, son. I'm not, I said simply. But if you need help understanding what went wrong, maybe Caleb can explain. He's the one handling the finances, right? He went silent for a moment. You sound awfully calm about this. I am, I replied. I've got nothing to hide. And I meant it. After that call, I didn't hear from him for several days. But then the texts started. First from my aunt. Your dad's furious. Something big is going on. Then from Caleb. Did you say something to anyone? Dad thinks you might have. I ignored them. The next Sunday, there was another family gathering. Not a barbecue this time, but a meeting. My father demanded everyone come to his house. The tone of his message was clear. This wasn't optional. Theo didn't want to go, but I told him he'd be fine. This isn't about you, buddy. Just family business. When we arrived, everyone was already there. The tension was thick. Caleb looked pale, my aunt wouldn't meet my eyes, and my father was standing near the window, his hands clasped behind his back. As soon as I walked in, he turned to me. You, he said sharply. We need to talk. I closed the door quietly. Sure. About what? Don't play innocent. You know exactly what's happening. Someone reported us to the county, and the only person who had access to those files years ago was you. Everyone was watching. I didn't deny it. I just met his eyes and said, maybe the county just decided to take a closer look. You've always said transparency is important, haven't you? His face turned red. You're destroying this family's reputation. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. The room went dead silent. Caleb stood frozen, and for the first time in my life, my father didn't have a response ready. I could tell this was only the beginning. He had no idea what else I had prepared. When my father called me a liar that afternoon, his voice had the same brittle edge it always did when his carefully constructed world started to wobble. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just spoke like a man reciting the rules of a room he'd furnished himself. But the funny thing was that the furniture had started to creak, and I could hear it from the other side of the house. I'd thought long and hard about what revenge would look like. I wasn't interested in petty payback. No one's vanishing lawn gnomes, no childish sabotage. I wanted something that mattered. I wanted him to lose the easy certainty that comes from shrinking other people. I wanted him to feel what it did to have doors close, to have people who once took his word for it stop taking it. I wanted his empire, the one he built on appearances and borrowed favors, to reveal its rotten beams. So I did what I'd done in the quiet years before. I planned. First, I tightened my relationship with Lydia. She promised to handle things legally and carefully. No leaks to the press that could backfire, no dramatic public shaming that might only give him a martyr card to play. We were surgical. Lydia started the audit paperwork using the copies I'd provided. It took weeks to move through red tape, phone calls, and bureaucratic slow burns. I did not call anyone in the family to gloat. I'd learned that silence is its own kind of weapon. It's patient, and it makes people fill the silence with their own imagination, which, in my father's case, always assumed catastrophe. Meanwhile, I reached out to several of the clients whose projects had suspicious invoices attached. I didn't accuse, I didn't slander. I asked practical, pointed questions. Had the subcontractor in the invoice actually been to the site? Who signed off on the material deliveries? Could they produce the receipts? A few of those conversations were informal and polite. Others were brutal and short. A general contractor tells you the truth when money is at stake. One by one, clients began to notice inconsistencies, delays, materials that never arrived, change orders that made no sense. Then came the smaller, cruelly effective moves. I contacted a bonding company, one that underwrites construction projects in our county. I didn't feed them drama, I gave them facts. Duplicate invoices, phantom subcontractors, payments made to shell accounts. I asked a single, simple question. If you were asked to back a company that's been using phony documents to secure jobs, would you continue to back them? They didn't continue. When a bonding company withdraws support, it's not just an abstract inconvenience. Contracts stop in midair because clients demand security for completion. Suppliers stop delivering on credit. Subcontractors, who mostly live week to week, pack up and leave if they aren't being paid or if a job loses its bond. And when payroll can't be met, the rumor mill turns into a machine. By the time the county compliance office officially froze a set of accounts, several of my father's big clients had already halted payments. A very careful, very blunt investigator came down and told him there was enough there to warrant a deep dive. He asked for cooperation. My father shuffled papers and smiled with the same practiced face he used at barbecues. If you watch closely, his hands trembled. It was small things at first. The company phone started to go unanswered during business hours because the person who handled supplier calls had been let go the week before amidst restructuring. A notice went up on one of the bigger job sites. Work suspended until further notice. Caleb tried to keep a poker face, but once a few workers saw their paychecks bounce, he was openly furious. He blamed my father in private and blamed the auditors in public. My father blamed anyone but himself. The family, of course, noticed. Supposedly loyal people started to distance themselves in ways thin with civility. A contractor friend of mine, someone my dad had once ignored, came by my garage because he needed help with an engine. He looked me in the eye and said, "You did the right thing." He was elbowing everyone until there was nothing left to move. That line stung because it was true and because it came from someone I hadn't expected to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, at home, I had to play a role for Theo. I chose to shield him from the technicalities, no bedtime stories about audits or bonding companies. But I didn't hide the truth that things were changing. When Theo asked if Grandpa would still come for holidays, I told him Grandpa would be around, but maybe different. The kid is resilient. He accepted that answer and moved on to which dinosaur wanted to drive which truck at the playground. His small concerns reminded me why I'd set this in motion. Not for vengeance's thrill, but to stop a pattern of belittlement before it calcified into habit for my son. As pressure mounted, my father's behavior shifted from smugness to micropanics. He started showing up at the office more, too often, and barking orders that no one followed. He would call me sometimes in a tone that tried to mask fear with faux authority. "We'll weather this, Dominic. It's a bump. You should come back and help. No one knows these clients like I do." The implication that the man who'd fired me and pushed me out had the leverage to pull me back in was rich. I let him talk. I gave him no satisfaction. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, leverage that cut deeper than frozen bank accounts. I arranged, quietly, to meet one of the county investigators and the procurement manager for a major client at a public place. I showed them the timeline, the copies, the receipts that didn't match deliveries. I wasn't there to act as judge or prosecutor. I was there to ensure the people who had the power to act had the full picture and the courage to move. They did. On a humid Saturday, of all days, the one my father had chosen for another of his family gatherings, I got a call from Lydia. They're ready. The sheriff's office will be there to serve notices. Do you want to come? Her voice was steady. The way she phrased it made it clear we were no longer in the realm of quiet audits. This was the procedural, cold-hearted choreography of enforcement. I took Theo. I didn't want him to see lawmen come for his grandfather's dignity later in whispers. If it was going to happen, he'd watch it unfold like everyone else. We drove to my father's house under a sky that tasted of rain. The backyard was set up like it always was when he expected public approval. Tables, new cushions, the grill that never seemed to cool. People milled about, children shrieking in the pool. My father was mid-sentence, brandishing a tongs and telling a story about a client who'd finally appreciated his foresight. I stood by the fence with Theo at my side, letting the scene unfold. I could see the practiced grin in action, how his words smoothed everything. Then I saw the sheriff's deputy step through the gate. He wore no theatrics, no raised voice. He carried a folder and a form that made the room tilt. "Mr. Collins?" the deputy asked, voice calm. "We're here to deliver some civil notices from the county compliance office. Could you come with me?" The world seemed to thin. Conversations stopped mid-breath. My father's hand tightened on the tongs until they creaked. I watched him for the first inkling of strategy, something my mother had once called his fast twitch. But he didn't bark orders. He orbited the deputy's gravity and said, "Of course. Can this wait?" As if the law respected social timing. The deputy didn't smile. He handed him a folder. My father's eyes flicked to the embossed seal, then to the assembled family. I watched him search the faces he'd cultivated for sympathy. Some looked confused, some looked embarrassed. Caleb's face went a color I'd never seen on him, pale as plaster. My aunt clutched at her cardigan like a sail in sudden wind. My son leaned into me, small and quiet. "Is Grandpa in trouble?" he asked. "Yes," I said, just loud enough for him to hear. "He's about to be." My father read the first page, and his expression shifted into something I recognized. Disbelief, then anger, and finally a brittle, animal fear. He backed up a step, and for the first time in 20 years, he did not have a comeback ready. Around us, the backyard that had been a stage for his performances started to look like anything but. The cushions looked like props. The grill looked like a pedestal. The family chatter dimmed to an anxious hum. Someone, my aunt, I think, started to whisper about lawyers. A cousin tried to make a joke, and it died in the air. Nathan, who had been showing off his new gadget, slid his device back into his pocket. I felt a strange hush fall over me. Not triumphant, not bitter, just a hard clarity. This was real. This was not a grandstanding I'd orchestrated for show. Real people were going to lose paychecks, reputations, maybe even livelihoods. I'd made a choice to gamble on accountability over comfort, and the stakes were visible. The look on Caleb's face, the way my father's lungs worked a little faster, the way my aunt's fingers trembled. The deputy finished his delivery, his paperwork crisp in the humid air. He explained, politely and clinically, what the notices meant: temporary freeze order, initiation of a formal compliance audit, notice to clients. Some people clustered together, others drifted away. My father, who had spent his life building a myth, now had to stand in the middle of its collapse, and no one could scaffold him. He turned to me, rage leaking through the veneer. "You did this," he said, as if naming a monster could stop it. I felt the old thing rise, the urge to shout, to make him feel the humiliation he'd dished out. Instead, I looked at him as calmly as I could. "No," I said. "I gave the county evidence. I gave clients the truth. I did what I thought was right." He spat the word "right" back like it were foreign. There were 100 small moments after that. Phone calls, people leaving in awkward silence, someone from the client's side asking for a hard copy of the documents. Tears, in some corners, fury in others. The deputy finished, promised follow-ups, and left with the same quiet efficiency with which he'd arrived. As the sun slid behind the hedges, The party dissolved into a scene that felt like the opening of a play about the end of an era. Men stood in knots on the driveway. My father retreated to his study. Caleb paced. My aunt tried to block out the sound of voices with a glass of water. Theo looked up at me, eyes wide. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, small and honest. "No," I said, closing my hand over his. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to be fixed." He nodded like that made sense, and then, in a way that made my throat close, he returned to his little model car, determined to finish gluing a bumper back on. I stood there for a long time after the deputy had gone, the sounds of the neighborhood settling back to its normal, indifferent murmur. People would say things later. He'd been brought low. I'd been cruel. I'd gone too far. Maybe some of that would be true. Maybe not. I told myself I would bear what came next because I could not stand by and let my son internalize that he was less. That was my line. But even as I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion, I knew there was more to do. Audits have blind spots. People shuffle paperwork and hide things behind shell companies and old signatures. If anyone thought one delivery of notices would finish it, they didn't know my father or the way his people covered tracks. I had contingencies. I had files I'd backed up in places no one could find without me. I had friends in low places and allies in quiet offices. I had, most importantly, a reason that mattered more than revenge. A future where Theo's worth didn't need to be validated by a man who measured people like inventory. The house settled into an uneasy twilight. Inside, I could hear raised voices, Caleb accusing, my aunt pleading, my father denying. I could feel the shift in the family's gravity like the faint creak of a ship's anchor finally giving way. Outside, the deputy's cruiser pulled away down the street. I watched the tail lights disappear, and in that small, private moment, I let myself breathe. Then my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't expected flashed on the screen. A local reporter who covered county business, the kind of person who could turn documents into headlines. The message was simple. "Got a tip. Want to talk?" I looked at the house where my father's silhouette moved in the window and at Theo building his little car with concentration. I weighed the next move. The county had started a process. The system had begun to do its work. But reputation can be repaired. Deals can be made. If I wanted the change to stick, if I wanted him to truly feel the cost of what he'd built, there were other doors to open. I stared at the reporter's message. My thumb hovered. The night held its breath. I watched the reporter's message for a long moment. The deputy had left. The county's machinery had begun to grind. My father's backyard, which had always been a stage, was now the scene of a collapse. If the county did its job cleanly, it would strip away his stories and leave only the facts. If a reporter told the truth clearly, it would make sure those facts stuck to him in the public mind. I replied to the reporter. I met them the next morning and handed over a tidy, indexed packet. Copies of the invoices, chain of custody notes from Lydia, emails I'd found that suggested cover-ups, and a list of the clients I'd spoken to who'd confirmed deliveries never happened. I told the reporter what I remembered, my time at the company, how Caleb had been given free rein, and how my father loved the appearance of success more than the work it took to earn it honestly. I didn't embellish. I handed over what I had and let the story speak. The article ran 2 days later. It was careful. It led with the facts the county had served, a compliance audit into Richard Collins Construction, evidence of inflated project budgets, and allegations of phantom subcontractors. It quoted me, it quoted Lydia in a background way, and it quoted the county's preliminary statement about an ongoing investigation. The headline wasn't cruel, but it was sharp. Construction firm under audit after financial irregularities. Business owner says family betrayal exposed the truth. The fallout was immediate and ugly. One of the company's largest clients announced they were terminating contracts effective immediately. The local supplier that had quietly been fronting materials for years demanded payment in full and publicly rescinded their credit terms. Subcontractors that had been loyal, because they had to be, filed liens. The county widened the scope of the audit. A bank that had been financing a new development backed away. The backlog of job sites turned into a trail of unpaid workers and stopped progress. Caleb tried to salvage it by calling clients, by promising pay, by pleading. His confidence cracked under pressure. He went from swagger to frantic calls at midnight. My father retreated into denial, a place that looked paper-thin when the phones wouldn't stop ringing. He hired a lawyer who advised caution. Do not speak to the press. Do not sign anything. Cooperate with the auditors. The lawyer was an expensive buffer, but buffers have limits. He told the family what I'd already known. The county would follow the money. The paper trail was merciless. A few families lost paychecks. Workers who'd trusted the company were angry and scared. I felt the weight of that. I hadn't set out to hurt those people. I'd set out to stop someone who treated other people as instruments. When the first couple of subcontractors started calling me, angry and scared, I met them face to face. I explained what I knew and told them what I'd done. Some of them softened when they understood my motive. This wasn't about settling a grudge for a barbecue insult. It was about stopping a man who had treated people as dispensable. A few asked if I could help them connect to other work. I did what I could. You don't force a reckoning and then walk away ignoring the people who were trampled in the crossfire. 2 months after the notices were served, the county filed civil suits seeking restitution and sanctions. The county's investigator recommended referring parts of the case for criminal inquiry to the prosecutor because of the repetitive use of fabricated vendors and suspicious transfers. That was the moment this stopped being only about business and became a legal matter with potential criminal consequences. There was a criminal referral. The prosecutor opened an investigation into potential fraud. Caleb was the focus. His signatures appeared on many of the suspicious documents. He was arraigned on charges that included submitting false invoices and embezzling company funds. The town's chat boards lit up with outrage. People who'd once praised the company's flashy projects now asked how something so foundational could have been built on lies. My father's fall from the pedestal didn't come quickly. It came like erosion, small, inexorable, and then suddenly the cliff gave way. He fought the hearings, hired experts, and tried to reframe things as administrative errors. He insisted he'd been duped by a misguided son, by bad accounting software, by circumstances. No one in that house had the courage or the willingness to say the truth in public. He'd always chosen appearances over accountability, and when you build a life on that foundation, it will shift. Family relationships decayed in private and in petty public moments. My aunt tried to call me to patch things up. I listened to her recitation of how family needed to stick together, how this had been a misunderstanding, and how we should all be loyal when someone is down. I told her, calmly, that loyalty was one thing, enabling fraud was another. She hung up. Caleb's wife wrote a curt note saying they were considering their options. Some cousins came to the house to see what they could do, but they were careful, studiedly neutral. I learned which family members were true to blood and which were true to their image of being part of the successful clan. One of the most painful moments didn't involve courtrooms or cameras, but my son. He overheard 2 relatives in the grocery store whispering about how I'd ruined everything. Theo, 8 and blunt, turned to me in the cereal aisle and asked in a voice that wanted the world to stay simple, "Did Grandpa do something bad?" I knelt down and looked him in the eye. "He did something that hurt people," I said. "But telling the truth matters, even when it hurts. People will make their own choices about how they act." He considered that, then chose a box with a dinosaur on it. He always chose the small joys. I wanted to keep it that way. In court, evidence mounted. Emails were presented. Bank records were traced. Witnesses testified. Caleb's defense was messy. The more he tried to explain, the more inconsistencies showed. The judge was blunt and private. The patterns were clear, and they didn't look like mistakes. In a settlement hearing, my father's company declared insolvency. Assets were frozen. Ongoing contracts were canceled. The company's license to bid on public contracts was suspended indefinitely. It was the practical, administrative end of the empire. No sensational finale, just the slow closure of accounts, the reclaiming of assets, the ordering of restitution where possible. Caleb took the brunt of the legal consequences. He pled guilty to a subset of charges in a deal that included a lengthy probation period, mandatory restitution where possible, and community service. The prosecutor's office publicly noted the cooperation from several whistleblowers, my name among them, when they announced the plea. I didn't relish the publicity, but I accepted it as part of the unfolding truth. I knew my actions had consequences. I'd prepared for that. My father never faced criminal charges. He did, however, face civil penalties, fines, and public reprimands. Without a company, his identity, the armor he'd worn for decades, was stripped. He retreated into quiet days, his voice softer, no longer the commanding baritone that filled a room. He moved into a small apartment when creditors repossessed the house the bank had once admired on the neighborhood tour. He called me once, voice broken, asking if we could talk. I refused, not because I was cruel, but because some people cannot be trusted to change without hitting rock bottom. And even then, some don't change at all. They only seek comfort. He sought comfort from me as if our past had been a transaction. I shut that door. There were attempts at reconciliation, obviously. My aunt, cousin, and a couple of other family members sent me messages, apologies that were thin and calculated. A cousin hinted they could help with school if Theo needed it. I declined. I never wanted to punish Theo with bitterness or to teach him that acceptance can be bought. I told them, plainly, that if they wished to have a relationship with us, it would be on terms of honesty and respect. Otherwise, they could stay away. In the months that followed, my life became quieter in some ways and steadier in others. The garage kept me busy. Word of mouth brought in honest customers who appreciated my work and my diligence. A local shop owner who'd been a client for years started sending me small commercial work. The community, which can be cruel in whispers, is also practical. They want dependable service. I hired a young man who'd lost work because of the construction collapse and paid him fairly. We rebuilt something small and reliable out of the wreckage. Theo, for his part, handled the change with a pragmatism that embarrassed and humbled me. He asked once, months later, if his grandpa still came by to visit. I told him the truth. He might, but he wouldn't be welcome to treat anyone badly under our roof. Theo considered that, then asked if we could go to the park. We did. He raced a skateboard for the first time and laughed when he fell. He trusted us, me and his small, honest life, and that trust mattered more than anyone's need to be right. As for my father and the rest of the family, time did what it does. It smoothed some edges and hardened others. Caleb kept a low profile. He found intermittent work doing contract management under strict oversight and paid a chunk of restitution over several years. My father sent a card on Theo's birthday one year. No apology, no explanation, just a card. I tossed it in the drawer. Some relatives drifted back into the orbit when it seemed polite to do so. Most didn't. Those who did came with conditions, and conditions are not forgiveness. I do not forgive them, at least not the way forgiving is shown in novels. Grand gestures, sudden reconciliations, families holding hands in church while a piano crescendos. That kind of tidy ending wasn't on offer. What I did instead was something quieter. I reclaimed the dignity my father had tried to withhold. I set boundaries. I taught my son to measure people by how they treated others, not by how glossy their social media smelled. I made sure that when my father's name came up in the neighborhood, it didn't mean Theo needed to wonder if there was something wrong with him. At the end, what happened was this. The company my father had built on flash and purchased loyalty collapsed under the weight of its improprieties. Caleb took legal responsibility and bore most of the consequences. My father lost the image and, with it, much of his social capital. Family ties were strained beyond casual repair. Workers and clients who'd been hurt found partial restitution through settlements and community efforts. I lost some family, gained a quieter life, and kept my son. Was it revenge? In some ways, yes. I orchestrated a fall where the ledger matched the deed. But revenge isn't an ending where people clap and the protagonist walks into the sunset. Revenge, for me, was a corrective measure, harsh, necessary, and consequential. I didn't want to destroy people for sport. I wanted accountability. I wanted my son to grow up in a world where people are responsible for how they treat others. Today, Theo and I live in a small house that smells faintly of oil and coffee and the Saturday breakfasts I make for him. He's doing well in school, intrigued by engines and history, and he knows the value of steady work. My father lives a quieter life. He's still my father, biologically, but the man I see now is someone I admire less and keep at a distance. Family gatherings are smaller, kinder, and only sometimes awkward because of who's missing. If anyone asks what I regret, I'll say this. I regret the pain the fallout caused to people who weren't the architects of the scheme, workers and families who depended on paychecks. I regret that dignity sometimes must be reclaimed through brutality. But I do not regret standing up when my son's sense of worth was being smothered by a man who measured people in gadgets and borrowed praise. In the end, the barbecue that started it all became a story people told about a man who wanted to be bigger than he was. My son plays with a model car in the afternoon sun and asks questions about fairness that make me proud. The house on the hill is empty of its former sparkle. The family name carries different weight now. Some of us walk away. Some of us rebuild. And some of us, those who chose the easy path of appearances, learn what it feels like to be small for a long time. I keep a receipt from the first honest job I took after everything happened. It's folded in my wallet. On it, a customer scribbled, "Thanks, reliable, fair." That's the kind of reputation I want my son to inherit. The rest I left behind. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.